How's it going, Giants fans? My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today, we're going to give you our 53-man roster as cutdowns are currently happening. 7 players were released this morning. I'll list those off in a second, but we want to give you guys, the final roster, our projections, why we made some decisions. Definitely going to be some tough ones. And I also think that even after the 53-man roster is set, I think the Giants will be making more moves. There will be guys that lose their jobs just because they find better ones on the waiver wire. There's a couple of really good players that have already hit the market that the Giants, I do believe, will be eyeing. And some guys will land on the practice squad, specifically the 7 guys they released this morning: Josh Rivas, Yusuf Corker, Ryan Santoso, Keelan Doss, Travis Toivonen, Elijah Griffin, and Eric Smith. So, Yusuf Corker is a pretty interesting player. I think that he'll land on the practice squad if he's not scooped up. Undrafted free agent out of Kentucky. Had some good impact plays this summer, and I think that he might be someone that's worth developing behind the scenes. But, this 53-man roster, you're going to see a lot of lack of depth. Some decent starters. Some positions are better than others. There's a lot of positions, though, that need a lot of work. And I think that, as Brian Dable said this morning, he said Joe Schoen is open for business. And apparently some teams are actually inquiring about trading for Darius Slayton. So that's interesting. We'll keep you guys up to date with any news that does break on that end. But Anthony, before we dive into our 53-man roster, how do you do today, my friend?
I'm doing great. The preseason has officially wrapped up. As you mentioned, a bunch of cuts went down today for the Giants and for all the teams around the NFL. And this is roster shuffling time. This is, in my opinion, the climax of the offseason. All offseason long, the Giants, every team has been building their roster up to get it to a respectable point, to a competitive standpoint. But now at the end of the preseason, that's when you say, okay, we built this roster. Let's reevaluate, see where we went wrong, see where we went right, and then figure out how we want to change things going forward into the regular season. This is it. This is like the final deadline. You can make some improvements during the regular season, but those are going to be few and far between. Those are going to be emergency pickups because someone got injured. But right now is the time for the Giants to shore up their depth. Take a look at their roster objectively. Say, this is a position where we are weak. We need to make some moves. Shuffle some of these players from the receiver position. We have a lot of depth there. Cut a bunch of them. They did cut a bunch of receivers today. And let's go pick up some depth at another position. The waiver wire is going to be an important asset for the Giants over the next couple of days. Of course, there's going to be some trades made. Darius Slayton, as you mentioned, on the trading block. There's a lot of other low-end starters around the league that could potentially be quality starters for the Giants that are also on the trade block. I know that there's that Minnesota Vikings running back, Alexander Madison, who has some trade interest around the league. Not saying he's a fit with the Giants, but there's going to be other examples of that all around the league. I know offensive linemen, there's going to be some that maybe the Giants can make a conditional trade for. And those are all those possibilities that Joe Schoen needs to be open for business for. And those are all the possibilities that he needs to be evaluating, because right now the Giants might have built a better roster than they had going into last regular season. I believe that. I think the offensive line has improved. I think there's certain positions that have definitely improved in depth areas, but there's also other positions that maybe are worse than last season. And that's where the Giants need to say, okay, let's bring this up to speed. Let's bring these guys up to the talent level of these other positional groups and shore up that depth and make sure that we're fully prepared to endure a 17-game regular season. Now's the time. A lot of roster shuffling is going to go on, but it's going to be really exciting to see how the Giants roster shapes out over the course of the next couple of days.
Yep, and tomorrow, 4 p.m., that's the deadline. So, I think Brian Dable already said before practice tomorrow about 1:30, they're going to do, I think, 20 cuts. So, we'll be listing them off. Obviously, we'll get you guys up to date with any players that are released. But let's look at our projected 53-man roster. So right off the bat, we'll talk about the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks, I think, are pretty much set. Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, and Davis Webb. Davis Webb looked really good in the preseason. He knows Brian Dable's offense. He knows and he feels comfortable with the scheme. And I think that is very valuable for a team that, you look at Tyrod Taylor and Daniel Jones. Both of them have sustained, injuries pretty consistently over the last couple of years. Daniel Jones, definitely, a lot of them came from running the football. Hopefully he's able to stand in the pocket and kind of protect himself a little bit better moving forward. And he can, maintain that health, which is definitely an important factor. We were blessed with Eli Manning never missing a game for a decade. So, now we're kind of looking at the situation saying, okay, we need Tyrod, good backup. Davis Webb can get it done too. He's also just a really good coach, like behind the scenes. He does a lot of good things for the other players. But the Buffalo Bills actually offered him a coaching position. He turned it down because he wanted to keep playing. So that's definitely something I think, is valuable to Brian Dable and this Giants, front office in general. But what do you think about that? I think, Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, Davis Webb, pretty much settled.
I think Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor are obviously locked into roster spots. The Giants put a significant amount of money into Tyrod Taylor to be the QB2. Davis Webb, however, yes, he looked really good in the preseason. He does provide a lot from a coaching standpoint. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Giants maybe talk to him and say, could we release you and bring you on as a coach? We know that you declined that offer from the Bills, but maybe you could do it here. It wouldn't shock me at all. Wouldn't shock me if they do move on from Davis Webb, because carrying 3 quarterbacks, I understand Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor both have bad injury history, but 3 quarterbacks means 1 less cornerback, 1 less receiver, 1 less tight end. So if you think you can get by with Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor, that's probably the move that the Giants need to make, even though you'll be sacrificing some great valuable coaching out of Davis Webb, player coaching, that is. So it's going to be a toss-up. I could see him getting cut, but I am leaning towards keeping Davis Webb around just because of the injury history of QB1 and QB2 on the Giants roster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I actually just saw that Sandro Platzkummer will be cut as well. So that kind of, just stumbled upon that. So, that's another one you can add to the list. So about 8 there. But he's not on our 53 man. The Giants do have the international exemption, which we will discuss in a couple minutes here. But at running back, I have Saquon Barkley, Matt Breida, Gary Brightwell, and Antonio Williams. So Jayshon Corbin out of FSU, undrafted free agent. I think he personally lands on the practice squad. He doesn't offer you any special team support, which is where I think his value gets diminished a little bit. But I do like him as a pass catching running back. Definitely some decent stuff out of him this summer. And someone I'd like to see continue developing behind the scenes. But Saquon, Breida, Brightwell, Williams, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in my opinion, Matt Breida hasn't proven to be healthy enough this offseason. I don't think that he's a lock to make this roster. In fact, I think that I would rather bank on the potential of Jayshon Corbin. I like what he showed in the receiving game. I like that he showed he's healthy, he's physical. I like what he showed in the preseason, just in general, and I'm not completely sold on Matt Breida. I know we've seen him be a quality player for other teams in the past, but in my opinion, you mentioned Saquon Barkley, Matt Breida, Gary Brightwell, and Antonio Williams. I think that I would maybe go Barkley, Williams, Jayshon Corbin, and Gary Brightwell. I like that group. I don't think Matt Breida is worth the investment, because right now what we're looking at is Saquon Barkley as an injury-prone running back. I don't need another injury-prone running back backing him up in Matt Breida. So that's just personally how I feel. I don't think Matt Breida is a lock, and in fact, I wouldn't be upset or surprised at all if the Giants decided to move on from Matt Breida.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, he's proven back, definitely has some good athleticism, but like you said, he's dealt with injury stuff in the past and this offseason specifically. So definitely a guy that, isn't a lock, but I do think he makes it just based on a veteran experience alone. And you have to have a decent backup for Saquon. So that's kind of my take there. But as for the wide receiver group, I have Kenny Galladay, Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, Wandale, Richie James, David Sills, and CJ Board. So the 3, 4, 5, I have 7 receivers making this roster. I think the Sills and Board take could be one that people will, may have a different opinion on, which obviously, is what I'm looking to see from you guys. Like, what are your thoughts? I think Richie James definitely has value because he also contributes on special teams, and CJ Board also pretty solid gunner. He can return kicks. I mean, he fumbled, got injured a couple, I think 2 weeks ago, but mostly he's decent. He's a decent backup receiver. He came in and made some plays for us in the past. And David Sills, I think, has just unbelievable chemistry with Daniel Jones, and I think he's worked his butt off. I think Brian Daboll values that effort and values that chemistry and gives him an opportunity. But I will say this, if the Giants find someone on the waiver wire that they really like, I think David Sills is probably the first one to go in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that would make sense to me as well. You mentioned 7 receivers being held on the roster. That makes sense. I wouldn't even be shocked if the Giants go with 8 wide receivers on the roster. Keep this in mind. This is going to be a spread coast offense. First of all, they're going to try and get a few wide receivers on the practice squad just to make sure that they have that insurance. But second of all, as I mentioned, spread coast offense, you will see a lot of 5 wide receivers on the field at one time for the Giants. If any of those guys get injured, then you only have 1 backup receiver on the roster in a 5 wide package. So keep that in mind. The Giants are going to want to hold as many receivers on this roster as possible due to the nature of the offense that they play. Brian Daboll is known not to go with the heavy tight end personnel packages. Heavy wide receiver packages, absolutely. So you could see a situation where the Giants only hold 3 tight ends on the roster and 8 wide receivers instead, which is a little unorthodox. A lot of teams, you'll see 4 tight ends, 7 receivers. I could see the Giants holding on to an extra receiver. Maybe that's where the Davis Webb conversation comes into play. Sacrifice a 3rd-string quarterback to have an 8th-string wide receiver. Not the worst idea with this specific offensive scheme. So keep that in mind. But all the names that you mentioned, I'm in full agreement with them. I like David Sills. I think that he is such a great practice player. Whether or not he performs in the regular season, even sees any playing time, I just think that the fact that he has such great chemistry with Daniel Jones and those two always click in practice, that is super valuable in my opinion. And it might be enough to keep him on the back end of the roster, just to keep him as a very valuable practice player that Daniel Jones has some chemistry with if they need to throw him onto the field during the regular season in a pinch.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, it's not a guy that is going to come in not knowing the system, not having chemistry with Daniel Jones. I think there is value for that. But I think his entire existence, because he doesn't offer anything on special teams, his entire existence is because how close he is with Daniel Jones. But, in the future, if DJ is not there, David Sills, unfortunately, I think gets the cut. So that's really where his value stands. But he made a couple good plays during preseason. I think that a lot of people will be pleased to see him get an opportunity, hopefully, make an impact in some way, barring of course, injuries will be the only way he really sees the field. So we'll see what happens there. And I think Brian Dable did say a couple days ago that they're not only in line to make the roster, but to play as well. So, he was very, very vague about Kenny Galladay's role. He's one of the only veterans that was actually playing like a decent number of snaps in this last preseason game. So I find that to be very interesting. Clearly, they're trying to get something out of him. I don't know what it is, but we're going to find out pretty soon once the regular season starts. But for the tight end position, that's one of the weakest spots on this roster. Ricky Seals-Jones on IR. He's done for the year. So I have Daniel Bellinger, Austin Allen, and Jake Myrick. These are three guys that are pretty much unproven entirely. Bellinger and Allen, both of them are rookies. Bellinger out of North Dakota State, or rather San Diego State. And then you have Allen out of Nebraska. So both undrafted free, or rather, God, Jesus Christmas. Bellinger's the fourth round rookie, and then Allen is the undrafted free agent. So those are my three tight ends. I definitely think we're going to be seeing the Giants look at the waiver wire or free agent market to get another veteran or get somebody with some experience. I don't think that position will be set even after the 53-man roster is concluded. But Anthony, what are you thinking about the tight ends here and those three players specifically?
In my opinion, this is a position that's almost guaranteed to change after the 53-man roster is set. I don't think that these three guys you can rely on for 17 games. The Giants are going to get on the waiver wire and find a new tight end, or they're going to go into free agency, or they're going to make a late conditional round pick to pick up some veteran tight end. Something's going to happen at this position, in my opinion. Those three guys, that is not an acceptable group to put on your roster for an NFL regular season, in my opinion. You can't bank everything on a fourth-round rookie as your tight end one. That's just how I feel. I love Daniel Bellinger. I'm a huge fan of his game. I think that he's a perfect scheme fit for what the Giants are trying to do. I like his reliability as a pass catcher. I like his aggressiveness as a run blocker. There is a lot to like about Daniel Bellinger, but he is a fourth-round rookie. He is not prepared to go 17 games as a starter for the Giants, in my opinion. That's just how I feel. I think they need to find some more talent at this position. Holding three tight ends, that's good. That's okay for this scheme. The tight ends, you're not going to depend on them too much, but do you really want to rely on a fourth-round rookie and an undrafted rookie as two of your three tight ends? Not so much. I don't think that's the best idea for the Giants. So this is a position that I can almost guarantee they will make some moves at, whether that be on the waiver wire, little conditional trade, or a veteran free agent still sitting in the free agency pool. Something's going to happen here in my eyes. I think that the three that you mentioned are likely to be the ones left standing after the cuts for the final 53-man roster. However, the final 53-man roster is always subject to change afterwards, and that's because of the waiver wire, free agency, and the trades, all that stuff that I just mentioned. And if there's any position that I can almost guarantee is going to change over the course of the next 3 days after the cuts are finalized, it is the tight end position.
Yeah, that's big facts. And, we also discussed Darius Slayton and the money that they would get from him. So maybe there's a free agent out there the Giants may look into, but I think waiver wire is probably where they go with the tight end position, just so they can save a little bit of cash and find somebody who might be able to develop and grow a little bit with the team. At offensive tackle, I have Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal, Devery Hamilton, Roy Mbetika, and Mbetika. I don't know how to say his last name. Someone please correct me. And I have Matt Pert actually making the roster because he's coming back from that Achilles, or rather the torn ACL from last year. So Thomas and Neal obviously situated. McEnroe gone, neck issue. He's not on the team anymore, so his career is actually in jeopardy. Hamilton, pretty solid showing in preseason thus far at offensive tackle, can play both left and right, and actually had some snaps at left guard as well. So there's value there. The international exemption, I think, is Mbetika. And I think Matt Pert makes the roster because, he is a decent player in terms of like run blocking. He's got some good size. I think development wise, Bobby Johnson will have at least a better chance of getting the most out of him. I think that offensive tackle spot is not done. I think that will be a spot that gets a couple more players in the coming days here. I think that Pert, even though he makes the roster on my list, probably, honestly, he's a third-round pick from last year. So I honestly think he might get cut. The year before, so 2020. So it was a third round pick from 2020. Basically, like in my opinion, I think you're probably looking at him as a roster. I think they keep him just because they need the depth and they need the support. But I think that he probably gets replaced by a waiver wire claim. What are your thoughts on the offensive tackle spot?
Yeah, I'll firstly speak on Matt Parrott. Super disappointing start to his career. Just can't get past the injuries. He just keeps getting injured, whether it be his back, his knee, whatever. He's constantly injured. Maybe that's because he's a ginormous 6'8" human being. His body just can't withstand the full blow of a regular season in the NFL, possibly. But what I will say about Matt Parrott is, yes, there are a lot of developmental traits to really love about that player. And he is kind of a perfect swing tackle. You know, when you want that jumbo tight end in there just to get that extra 6'8" behemoth to go out there and put some run blocking in, Matt Parrott fits that role really well. So if they do want a developmental swing tackle, they could go with Matt Parrott, cheap contract, because as you mentioned, he was a third round pick 2 years ago. So you know his contract is cheap. You're probably not finding anyone cheaper to play that swing tackle position. I could see Matt Parrott making this roster as he works back from injury. However, as you mentioned, I could see him making the 53-man roster, then getting waived the next day, and the Giants pick up someone that they like better on the waiver claims. Keep in mind, this regime, the Joe Schoen, Brian Dable regime, zero ties to Matt Parrott. So yes, maybe they like him right now. Maybe they have someone who gets cut by the Bills that they like better, and they go with him instead as their swing tackle. So that's always a possibility here. I think that the tackle position is definitely subject to change over the course of the next few days. I think that they'll hold probably 3 or 4 offensive tackles on the roster. But the main position that they need to look for more depth and look for more quality depth is, in my opinion, on the interior of the offensive line. So I'm sure that's where we're going to discuss next.
Yeah, the interior is very, very weak. I have Shane Lemieux, Mark Lewinsky, Josh Azudu, Jamil Douglas, and Ben Bredesen making the team at offensive guard. I think Max Garcia ultimately gets cut. He kind of was, settling in with the third squad there, and he was filling it at center because they just didn't have anybody. Then I have Feliciano and Nick Gates, obviously, at center. Gates, I think, could make a return at some point. He'll end up being the backup there, but that's also a position, man. Like Lemieux's injured. Who knows when he's coming back? He's been in a walking boot. Azudu also has been dealing with some stuff. Douglas is okay. Ben Bredesen's decent. He's not anything special. The waiver wire, there's going to be a lot of teams going after guys. You're looking at the Raiders potentially trading Alex Leatherwood. Maybe the Giants go and try to scoop him up for whatever. I don't know exactly. I think he actually was a first round pick from 2 years ago, and he's been underwhelming, I guess. So, you're looking at Alex Leatherwood and saying maybe we can get the most out of him. I wonder what Vegas wants in return. Probably something decent. If they're looking for like a third or second round draft pick, I probably wouldn't bite on that because I think the Giants need their draft capital moving forward. But what are your thoughts on Lemieux, Glowinski, Azudu, Douglas, Bredesen, Feliciano, and Gates?
I think that's a solid group right there. I think if I had to guess, that will be the group. Now, of course, again, could be subject to change. Let's check out the waiver wire. Let's see if any third round picks from last year get waived. Some offensive guards that maybe you and I really liked pre-draft process that maybe just haven't shapen out with the current teams that they're on. Needs a change of scenery. I mentioned that in yesterday's episode talking about Quincy Roche. He was a player that was supposed to be a third round pick, edge rusher out of Miami, ends up falling to the 6th round with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Gets waived, Giants pick him up right before the start of the regular season. He ends up starting a few games for us and being a solid contributor. Let's see if anything like that maybe happens on the offensive line as well. It's always a possibility. So while I like the group of interior offensive linemen that you just mentioned, I could see room for improvement. Absolutely. I could see improvement when you're talking about Ben Bredesen. I could really just see a lot of improvement when you're talking about the left guard and center position completely. Whether you're talking about first string or backup, I think first string and backups could probably improve in that regard, left guard and center. I like John Feliciano. I think that he's a great veteran presence, but is he the best center on the planet? Obviously not, and I could see the Giants maybe finding someone who could step in and overtake his role at some point. And I could also see the same for the left guard position, especially considering the injuries at that position. Shane Lemieux hobbled with an injury. Joshua Azudu hobbled with an injury. I could see the Giants going out there, finding a low-end starter to replace one of these guys, honestly, in some sort of competition over the course of the early weeks of the regular season. So just keep an eye on that position, especially left guard. I could see the Giants totally going active, getting really active on the waiver wire for that position, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how that one shapes out.
That it will. It will be very interesting to see how that interior offensive line spot shakes out. Like there is going to be some moves. Honestly, up to this point, I can already say I think wide receiver, tight end, offensive tackle, and offensive guard are all going to have a little bit of movement after the 53-man roster is concluded. This is a situation where like their backups, they have some time to get adjusted to their scheme and everything. You still have a couple, 2 weeks or so. You're looking at guys who probably wouldn't be making rosters on other teams just because of the lack of depth we have on this one. So I would not be surprised if they made a couple changes after roster cutdowns. Now the guarantee is pretty much on the special teams unit. Chris Kreider at long snap, at kicker Graham Gano, and then punch you have Gillian. So these are all pretty much cemented players there. And then heading over to the defensive side, you have the outside linebacker group, which I have Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari, Jaheed Ward. I actually have Ocean Ximenez and Timon Fox making this roster. I think the Ximenez and Fox are interesting. I actually don't have Ellerson Smith making the roster. He has been extremely disappointing. The injuries with him are just nonstop. Like the guy is just literally the second this man stepped into the building, the abdominal issues, and he had the lower body issues. He has not played at all. At this point, I just don't think it's worthwhile giving him a roster spot because I don't think he's going to amount to anything. I like what he had coming out of North Dakota State. I mean, like he had some decent stuff, really fast, really quick, some good length, but ultimately I just don't think he's going to be able to seal the edge of the NFL level. He might be a decent piece in a Wink Martindale system, but I just don't really see how he makes this team, even though he was a 4th round pick from, last year. It's just a tough situation where you just kind of got to cut bait if you have a guy that just can't make it onto the field and there's other guys competing and making a difference. So, what are your thoughts on, Kayvon obviously making it, Ojulari obviously making it. I think Ward obviously makes it, but Ximenez and Fox, definitely interested to hear your opinion on that one.
I like Ximenez making it, but I don't think it's necessarily a guarantee. You know me, I really like Quincy Roche. I'd probably go with Quincy Roche over Oshane Ximenez. That's just how I feel. I think there's more potential there. I think there's also more health history that I would prefer to rely on Quincy Roche, and I think that there's more that's shown up on the field, in all honesty. I really like what Quincy Roche brought to the Giants last year as a rookie, developing on a new team that he was just cut from another team. Young guy, like, I'd rather bank on Quincy Roche than Oshane Ximenez personally. Timon Fox, I like what he showed in the preseason, so yes, I can absolutely see him here. And I will speak on Ellerson Smith. I was never a fan, okay? I never really saw the avenue for Ellerson Smith. When the Giants drafted him, I didn't think it was the greatest draft pick. He's way too tall and way too skinny, and that's always a bad combination for an edge rusher, for a defensive lineman, anything like that. The only way that I ever saw Ellerson Smith making an impact on the New York Giants roster was on special teams, blocking some field goals. But those opportunities are few and far between. You are not making a roster just because you have long enough arms to maybe block 1 or 2 field goals in your career. Okay, so in my opinion, Ellerson Smith, totally fine moving on with him. I know I said it months ago that I didn't think he was going to make the 53-man roster. You pushed back at that idea. We had a little bit of a debate. Now we're here. It really doesn't look like Ellerson Smith has any opportunity to make the roster. There are other guys who are now at this point, it's been 2 years, younger than Ellerson Smith, better than Ellerson Smith, and fighting way harder than Ellerson Smith. I get it. Ellerson Smith's been injured. I don't wish injuries on anybody. I hate the fact that he's been injured and we haven't seen him, even get healthy enough to play. But that's the nature of the game. If you can't stay healthy, one of the best abilities is durability, and the Giants are going to find the more durable player and rock with them instead.
Yep, I think that's kind of what I'm on as well. So at defensive tackle, I have Leonard Williams, obviously, Dexter Lawrence. I'm just labeling them as defensive tackle. Nick Williams and DJ Davidson, rookie. So a couple young guys, couple of established ones. Usually the Giants bring in about 4 or 5 interior defensive linemen, on the roster, but that could be shifting as well once waiver wire cuts kind of happen across the league. So even afterward, I wouldn't be completely sold on Nick Williams. I think DJ Davidson being a rookie makes the roster, but this could be an interesting one. What are your thoughts on those group of Leo, Dexter, Williams, and Davidson?
I think that's a solid group. The only other name that I'd say is maybe you could talk about Justin Ellis working his way there. If I'm remembering correctly, he's got a lot of familiarity with Wink Martindale, that defensive scheme. So maybe the transition is just a little bit easier to have Justin Ellis step in and be that veteran guy who knows the defense. But I think that you're right. They'll probably rather bank on DJ Davidson, a young guy, great run stopping ability, showed some promise in the preseason. I think that group that you just mentioned is really solid. Can't really see too much changing there. Interior defensive line is not a position where you need a ton of depth. Injuries there are kind of few and far between. They don't happen too frequently. And these guys that we just mentioned are pretty durable as is. So I think I'm happy with that group. Again, keep an eye on the waiver wire. Maybe they find someone that they like better than DJ Davidson, who was maybe drafted a little bit higher or was ranked higher on the draft board. Always completely possible. But I think the group that you just mentioned will be the accurate projection.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So at cornerback, the most annoying position on the roster. I can't even fathom how we don't have more depth at this spot already. But essentially, we have Adoree Jackson, Aaron Robinson, Cordell Flott, and Darnay Holmes. I only have 4 cornerbacks on the roster right now. because I simply don't know who else would make the roster. You're looking at like Zion Gilbert, Harrison Hand. You're looking at Rodarius Williams, I think gets cut. He's been injured. The ACL injury is really tough for him. Khalil Dorsey, he's got to be cut. He was just destroyed against the Jets. And Darren Evans, there's just not enough. You know what I mean? There's not enough guys who can make an impact here in a positive way. A lot of them are just really reserve backup guys that you don't want on the field. I think personally what will happen is you're looking at Adoree Robinson, Flat Holmes, and you're probably looking at trading Darius Slayton or at least cutting him and then flipping that money over into a guy like Jimmy Smith, who's a veteran and knows the system and can come in and contribute immediately. I think that's the direction the Giants go in. But what are your thoughts on those cornerbacks? Because I think they go into the season, at least they go into the 53-man roster cuts with only 4 on the roster. I think the plan is to add more in the next couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, I said it earlier. I can guarantee that the tight end position is going to be adjusted after the final wave of cuts. I'm making the same guarantee for the cornerback position. That position will change. Honestly, I hate to be so blunt about this. This cornerback group is disgusting. This is so not ready for a regular season. This is like so scary that the Giants are going to trot these guys out there as their starters at cornerback. I understand the cutting of James Bradbury was necessary. It had to happen. But oh my God, does it really highlight how thin the depth was at cornerback for the Giants last season and, of course, this offseason. This is a position that needs to be improved ahead of the regular season. 2 weeks to do it. The Giants can get it done for sure. They can find someone on the waiver wire. There's a plethora of veterans that we've mentioned over the past couple of weeks on this podcast. Jimmy Smith, Chris Harris Jr. There's some older guys out there that could maybe step in, be those veterans that can just kind of be the stopgap for a year. I could see that happening. But right now, the 4 corners that you mentioned, that's not enough to get some wins in the NFL, man. That is bad depth. That's not even good starting quality. Like, the depth is bad, but the starters are also not that good. I mean, we signed Adoree Jackson last offseason. We were all like, yes, elite CB2. CB1, not so much, but elite CB2. Now he's our CB1, and everyone's like, ooh, I don't feel comfortable with that, right? So you just take a look at this cornerback position. It's not looking good right now. This is a position, again, I'm guaranteeing you're going to see some changes. Even the starters I could see changing. I've said this before. Aaron Robinson, I don't think he's a fit with the Giants. I wouldn't be shocked to see them trade him and, maybe do a swap, find another cornerback that another team has, and maybe the other team wants Aaron Robinson, doesn't like their cornerback, just a 1-for-1 swap based on positional and scheme fit. I could totally see something like that happening because I just don't think Aaron Robinson's a fit with the Giants right now. He hasn't played up to the performance that we wanted him to, and honestly, he has no ties to this regime. So don't be shocked to see him go and for them to find a new starter on the outside opposite of Adoree Jackson. But as you mentioned, there is not a lot of encouraging depth here. I don't think Cordell Flott is ready. Darnay Holmes, I'm really excited for him. Hope he has a big season in store. But other than that, I'm not too comfortable with any of these names. So, yeah, I'm going to guarantee that the Giants are going to go out there and make some moves at this position. And, in fact, if I were Joe Schoen, that is the first position that I'm making some changes at. That is the first position that I'm going to try and acquire some talent at. Because that, man, like I said, that's pretty gross. That's unacceptable.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's kind of crazy that they haven't made any changes yet, but that's why like Jimmy Smith is so obvious. Like, he knows the system. He knows the scheme. Day one, he comes in, he can play day one without having to do anything. Like, that's where I'm looking right now from the Giants, is a guy who understands what the job requires, and he can come in and start immediately opposite of Adoree Jackson if need be. And we know we can hold it down because of almost I think over a decade of experience with Wink Martindale in Baltimore. But looking at the linebacker spot, another position that's a little bit weak. You got Blake Martinez, Tay Crowder, Micah McFadden, and I actually have Cam Brown making the roster as well, just because of his special teams value. Crowder has had a pretty solid preseason. Blake obviously is your starting LB1, and Micah McFadden actually forced a fumble against the Jets yesterday, so he had a pretty good game. This is a guy who, is a rookie out of Indiana, pretty aggressive, someone I like in terms of development, but he's not ready to start or make an impact right now, I think. I would not be surprised if Cam Brown even lost his spot after the 53-man roster was announced, and they brought in another linebacker who could take on his role, plus offer some special teams value. But what do you think about Blake, Crowder, McFadden, and Brown?
I think that's a solid group right there. Austin Cleature looked really good in the preseason, though, so don't sleep on him. Maybe overtaking Carter Coughlin. Once again, Carter Coughlin having no ties to this regime. Austin Cleature, somebody that at least this regime found. So always a possibility there that you see some guys that maybe are better talent, but lesser of a scheme fit. Cam Brown, though, I like Cam Brown a lot. I thought that he was a great player coming out of Penn State, but he's really only on the team because of his special teams ability when you really take a look at it. So I think that the projection right now that you're making is an accurate one. However, yes, this is another position that I could see changing after the 53-man cuts.
And looking at the safety spot, another position. Actually, I think this one's probably a little bit more assured. When you have Xavier McKinney at free safety, of course, you have Julian Love at your strong safety spot. Dane Belton's expected to make a return in the next couple weeks. Obviously, competing at strong safety with Julian Love. I think they'll have a lot of three safety looks on the field, which will definitely be beneficial. And then Trent Thompson, who had a really solid preseason, overtook Yusuf Corker on the depth chart, and ultimately I think will make this team. Had a pretty solid day against the Jets yesterday. So this is a safety group that I'm a little bit more confident in than the cornerbacks. But is there anyone else that you're looking at? Maybe you would have liked Yusuf Corker to make this team. I think that Thompson looked pretty solid, and I'm comfortable with this group right now.
I'm also comfortable with this group. I'm not saying that this is a great group by any means, or this is exactly what the Giants need, or this is like totally adequate for a regular season. But this is the best that the Giants are going to get this group to be before the start of the regular season, in my opinion. I would have liked to see Yusuf Corker make it. However, I think he's a lock for the practice squad. And I think that if there's any injury in the safety position at any point this season, Yusuf Corker will get the nod. The coaching staff clearly trusts him. They had him with the green dot on his helmet. I do think there's a good chance that he does see some regular season playing time at some point this year if there's any sort of injuries. But the names that you mentioned, I like that group. I like the quality of Dane Belton as a prospect. I think there's a lot of potential there. Once he's healthy, I think that he will actually have an impact on this defense, not only at safety, but will also mask some of those deficiencies at cornerback because he can play a little bit in the slot as well. So that's one of the positions on defense that I'm more comfortable with is the safety position. Again, a lot of that is because of how great of a player Xavier McKinney is and how much I trust in him. Julian Love as well, trusted him a lot. But right now, I think the group that you mentioned is a solid enough group. That's not one of my high priority positions that I think the Giants need to make a bunch of improvements at. Like I mentioned, tight end, safety, or cornerback rather. Those are the positions that the Giants are going to need to focus on.
Yeah, man. Oh, God, this roster is definitely thin. You look back, you kind of read through all the names and look at all the depth, and it's just not where we need it to be. But it is the first year of a rebuild, so this is what I expected. Trying to temper my expectations. All I really want to see is growth, right? Like the last 2 years, we've seen better rosters. Like you look at it on paper, you're like, okay, this is a good roster. But here's something I'll remind everybody. Sometimes it doesn't matter as much about the players; it matters more about the coaching. If the coaching get the most out of these guys, because ultimately that's really what separates good teams from bad teams. Look at the Patriots. If you look at the Patriots roster every year, it's like, what the hell are they doing? Like, where are they finding these guys? And then suddenly they're like in the playoffs, or like they're a good team. They're a competent team. So it's ultimately about coaching. It's ultimately about how much they can get out of individuals. And I think that we are going to see a lot better product because of the coaching and the discipline and the execution. And not because of the individual performances of guys. It's going to be more of a team-oriented game, and just everyone doing their job well. And that's all it really takes to win football games is just everybody doing their job well and not making dumb mistakes and not knowing the scheme, not knowing the strategy. It's just everyone has to be on the same page and bought into the strategy and everything that Brian Daboll's trying to institute moving forward here. But that's our 53-man roster. Definitely going to be changes. This roster is far from settled, even after everything kind of concludes tomorrow at 4 p.m., Anthony. But what are your last thoughts? I think that, we're far from finding out what this regular season team is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, really, I'll just repeat your points, honestly. I think that this roster, there are some positions that I can feel somewhat comfortable in, but for the most part, there's a lot of changes that need to be made. They're going to trim this roster down to 53, and then there's going to be a bunch of changes afterwards. I'm hoping the Giants are able to get something of value out of Darius Slayton and find a way to improve some of those other positions that I mentioned, tight end, cornerback. Those are positions that definitely do need to have some depth added there. So over the course of the next few days, let's take a look at what Joe Schoen can do. He said he's open for business, and I'm excited to see him get to work.
Absolutely, my friends. But if you have any differing opinions, narratives below, please let us know in the YouTube comments. Always happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on this team. If you would supplement or replace any players that we did list, far from done. And we'll keep you guys updated with all the relevant information coming about this team in the coming days, specifically tomorrow. We'll take a look at some waiver wire guys that maybe other teams have released that the Giants could look to acquire. So definitely excited about that. But Anthony, appreciate it. As always, my friends, make sure to like and subscribe. We'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.